What is up, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of The Danny Show. I'm your host, Daniel Cody, and this is where I give commentary and reviews on all things wrestling. As you can see, first off, I finally figured it out, and I was able to get the screen fixed so we can get it in full screen motion at the right long term motion, by the way. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And today is a special day because while today is the day of WrestleMania 1, today just so happens to be another special day for a certain someone right here. Yep, today is the day of the Viper, Randy Orton, who many believe is rumored to be returning soon. But as a custom on this channel, I'm going to give you another top 10. This is part two. There is a part one. I'll be putting it in the cards or either linking it below. But today is part two of my top 10 favorite matches from Randy Orton. Let's get started. At number 10, we have Randy Orton versus Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania 33. I actually thought that match was pretty good. I love how in the star of the match was actually Bray Wyatt because even though Randy Orton won the match after burning the house down, this was a good match because there were a lot of blackouts and we saw roaches, we saw worms, and we saw what else? What else did we see? Roaches, worms, and I'm sorry, I'm a bit insect. I got a little thing about insects. Just thought of it makes me scratch myself. Just mm, Jesus. Ugh. But in any event, um, the match. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because that makes me itch. Um, the match between Bray Wyatt and Randy Orton WrestleMania 33 was very awesome. I love how the ring had screen effects every time the lights went down. That match was awesome. Randy Orton won the match, defeating Bray Wyatt, who was then WWE World Champion from SmackDown. At number 9, we have another match that took place at WrestleMania, and this was last year at WrestleMania 38, where Randy Orton, I believe this was WrestleMania Sunday, when Randy Orton teamed up with his friend Matt Riddle to take on both the Street Profits and the Alpha Academy. That one was also very great. Obviously, Montez was great in that match, but Riddle was a highlight in himself, performing a super RKO or RK Bro on Montez Ford from the top rope, giving time for Randy Orton to go for an RKO of his own and win the match for his team. At the time, Randy Orton and Riddle were the Raw Tag Team Champions. Another tag team match took place at another WrestleMania. This is Evolution alongside Ric Flair, woo, and Batista taking on the Rock and Sock Connection at WrestleMania 20. It was a handicap match between the past and the future, and it was the past legends in Rock and Sock, Mick Foley and The Rock, versus the future in Evolution, which was mentored by Ric Flair, who was also in that match. And it was Randy Orton who would be the cause of the victory for Evolution as he RKO'd Mick Foley for the win, winning the match for his team. At number 7, we have Randy Orton as part of the Money in the Bank 2013 match. That match was great, and it was an all-star match because it included Randy Orton, the returning RVD, Christian, Sheamus, yes, Daniel Bryan, and CM Punk. Am I missing somebody? Let me see. A lot of fan favorites in that match. Randy Orton, was Christian in that? Randy Orton, CM Punk, RVD, Daniel Bryan, Sheamus, and many others. Kane was supposed to be in that match but couldn't because of the Wyatt's attack. but that match was awesome. It was an all-star match between a lot of main event stars because they were in Philadelphia. CM Punk and RVD were the favorites, and the Yes Movement was taken off, so he was the favorite also. Brian, I'm speaking of. But that was the match that Randy Orton would ultimately win, and he would go on to become WWE World Champion with assistance from Triple H at SummerSlam, which was the birth of the Authority. Next, at number 6, we have RK Bro versus the Usos at Survivor Series 2021. Yes, 2021, I believe. This was SmackDown versus Raw because the Usos were still, yes, the Usos were still champions in 2021, and they have been champions since. The longest reigning tag team champions ever is the Usos. But is tonight the night that the Usos get dethroned? I don't know. All I know is the Usos were champions at the time, and RK Bro from Raw were the champions at the time, and both men were awesome in this match. But in the end, it was Randy Orton and Matt Riddle who would get the win thanks to an RKO by ours truly. Speaking of RKOs, let's go to number 5. We have Randy Orton versus Drew McIntyre, Hell in a Cell 2020. And this was, I believe, October, back when Hell in a Cell was in October. This match to me was pretty good. Drew McIntyre and Randy Orton had a heck of a rivalry, and Drew McIntyre got the best of most of it. But that night was Randy Orton's night, and it didn't help Drew McIntyre the fact that he got tossed halfway off the Hell in a Cell. They don't get tossed off the top anymore because of what it did to Mick Foley. They just get halfway atop the cell and fall off through the other half, which for the PG era is good enough to some. But in any event, that would be the cause of Drew McIntyre slowing down long enough for Randy Orton to deliver an RKO in the ring and become the WWE World Champion. As Roman was the Universal Champion for SmackDown, Randy Orton would be the WWE Champion for Raw. Unfortunately for Randy, that reign didn't last long because Drew came back a couple of weeks later on Raw and won. But that night at Hell in a Cell 2020 belonged to the Viper. And people say 2020 sucks. Not for Randy Orton. Speaking of Hell in a Cell, we have another Hell in a Cell match between Randy Orton and Jeff Hardy in 2018. First off, let me just say, that match was brutal. And the highlight of that match, I don't turn my head easy. I don't scare easy. But when Randy Orton got the screwdriver, and because you know Randy Orton loves to pull on things, and Jeff Hardy has that extended hole in his earring, much like Rhea Ripley does. But I'm not that famous, because if I were, I would have gave Charlotte Flair a very sadistic idea for tonight. But in any event, Jeff Hardy, because he has that hole in his ear, Randy Orton loved to target it, and he targeted it in the most disturbing fashion, piercing a screwdriver through the exposed part of his hair and just twisting and pulling it. And not a lot of stuff makes me turn my head. That match right there made me look away. And I don't look away easy. I've watched a whole lot of stuff. I've watched Mick Foley versus The Undertaker, best to me. That's an ASMR for me. Moxley versus Kenny Omega, unsanctioned. I can watch that stuff every day. Some of the most brutal matches in WWE could be my ASMR. That right there made my head turn. Just that was hard to watch. But both men were very competitive. But unfortunately for Jeff, his he lost mostly because of his own doing, not really because of Randy Orton. His own mistake cost him the victory when he tried to go for a swanton using the top of the steel cell, but he missed and fell onto the table, and Randy Orton capitalized. But if you want a rated R match in a PG era, that is it right there. At number three, we have the man who bapt. Edge is not the only one who has been baptized in hell by The Undertaker. Randy Orton has. But before Randy Orton had an amazing match with The Undertaker and earned his respect in Hell in a Cell, they had an amazing match at WrestleMania 21 in the same city that WrestleMania will be this year, in Los Angeles, ironically. And even though Randy Orton lost the match to one of my all time favorites, The Undertaker, and The Undertaker kept his streak alive, Randy Orton was a great performer of that match. And speaking of what I said about Jeff Hardy, Randy Orton's own doing would be his downfall. But it wasn't without competition, because the highlight of that match was when Undertaker attempted a choke slam when Randy Orton caught it with an RKO. Even though Randy Orton was healed because of what he did to Stacy Keibler, everyone's childhood crush, and even though they didn't like him for what he did to her, when he did that counter, the fans loved it. It was amazing, but not enough to love you to want you to defeat the streak. No, we still glad The Undertaker won. So even though it was a loss for Randy Orton, it was still a great match. Speaking of which, like I said, if you want to make fans hate you, bother Stacy Keibler. Don't mess with Stacy Keibler. Stacy Keibler to the Ruthless Aggression fans were like what Jada was to Will Smith. You hurt Stacy, we're all the Will Smith, and everyone is gonna come out. Don't bother Stacy. At number two, we have CM Punk versus Randy Orton at Extreme Rules. This match was much better than, as good as WrestleMania 27 was. The match at Extreme Rules to me was much better because these guys had to hit their finishing moves on each other more than once. Randy Orton overcame a GTS to the stairs, and even that wasn't enough. Then Randy Orton had to go for one RKO. An RKO on the announce table wasn't enough, but eventually it was a super RKO, I believe, and some kendo sticks that were able to keep CM Punk down for the 10 count, because it was a last man standing match. And as we all know, Randy Orton is bit good at last man standing matches. Just ask Triple H from No Mercy 2007. Speaking of Triple H, No Mercy 2007, that's not on this particular list, but what is on this list is Randy Orton versus Triple H at Super Showdown 2019. In my humble opinion, I think that match should have been the main event. And had we known that Undertaker versus Goldberg was going to be a disaster, and make no mistake about it, The Undertaker is one of my all time favorites. But even that match had a bad effect on The Undertaker, and The Undertaker's face at the end of that match became a meme for negative feelings to make fun of. However, like I said, on paper, Goldberg and The Undertaker should have been a great match, but it was a bit of a disaster. Randy Orton versus Triple H, on the other hand, was not. And many people think that match should have been the main event of that night because it would have ended on a good note. It was a match that Randy Orton would go to win because it took two RKOs to put Triple H down, and not to mention Randy Orton had to overcome a pedigree from Triple H to win the match. And if you want you to go out with a good match, Randy Orton's the guy to do it because this would be Triple H's last match. The next time we saw Triple H in the ring in a fight would be with Randy Orton, in which Alexa Bliss disrupted in 2021. That's my list for favorite matches with Randy Orton. What do you think about this list? Let me know in the comment section below. Which one was your favorite? If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I'm your host, Daniel Cody, and that's all the time I have for you today. And I'll be back with another review on all things wrestling. Peace out. Let's get ready for WrestleMania, baby.